Hey gang, Luke here. Breaking new ground in COP content with this multi-continental video. I am back in Melbourne here for the EC Buildings Energy Performance Summit. Had to come back. A little bit sad about that. Great to be with our friends here in Melbourne. Frankie, I think Tennant at this point we understand is mid-air, having been waylaid in Abu Dhabi via a missed connection. Is that correct?
Something like that. She was thwarted by international aviation. She was put up in a hotel for some period. We
Yep.
haven't heard from her for a number of hours, and the best possible interpretation of all that is that she's wigging her way home as we speak.
Yes. Yeah, yeah. So that's exciting. But we want to keep the content flowing because there's been things happening at COP, and I understand, Tennant, that you participated in the traditional mid COP plenary yesterday. Is that correct?
That's right. I was observing the plenary for 4 hours. The first of those hours, nothing was happening because it was late.
Yep.
But this is the point when the president of the COP comes into the great big room and he receives the report from the subsidiary bodies, the subsidiary body for implementation and the
Yep.
subsidiary body for scientific and technical advice, who have been presiding. They've been presiding over the first week's worth of technical work, and they
Yep.
do this highly, highly formalistic run through of what got agreed and what didn't get agreed. And basically, the president gavels through a bunch of small ball decisions that were inconsequential and then lays out the mode of work for how they're going to solve everything that still needs to be solved, which is a mix of technical work still outstanding on a bunch of important issues, and then
Yep.
big, curly political decisions. And for the political work, he appoints a bunch of ministerial co-facilitators to lead that stuff. So, unsurprisingly, one of the issues that still needs to be sorted out is a little thing called the new collective quantified goal for
Yep.
climate finance. And as advertised, Australia's own Chris Bowen is co-leading the consultations on that, along with the minister from Bhutan. But there's also work going on the mitigation work program, on
Yes.
adaptation, on the outcome, the dialogue, and the outcome of the global stock take from last year. And there's work going on Article 6, despite the hoopla over the big breakthrough agreements on
Yep.
Article 6 back at the very first day of COP. Actually, there's still plenty of technical stuff being wrangled, and Article 6 veterans pronounce themselves to be worried about some things in the mix there that could make it actually quite hard to use Article 6 carbon markets, including things that could make it very hard for them to interact with the Corsia airline emissions limitation and reduction scheme.
Right.
So action stations across the board. We also in that plenary got some initial reactions and interventions from party groupings in response to what the president laid out, and they were, broadly, they were happy with the mode of work that he set out. In addition to those consultations, by the way, there's going to be a convening of a high level open dialogue in a special format, probably tomorrow, maybe Thursday, to push through the last distance towards decision. This will probably be something a bit like the Majlis from last year. We'll see how that goes. The party groupings, they were okay with that, but they were expressing disappointment every which way at each other, at the state of progress overall.
Yep.
Um, there was a lot of pushback, not just from developed countries, but also from higher ambition developing countries about the need for a strong outcome at this COP on mitigation. So, of course, it is the finance COP, but it's also the last COP before the new round of NDCs are due. And a lot of parties want to see a strong push to themselves on mitigation, emissions reduction ambition in the final outcome. One thing that the president said, which may surprise some people, is that I've just hit an intersection in the corridors here. Is that he does not want and is not working on a cover text. So in the last three COPs, there's
Yep.
been a cover text beyond sitting on top of all the specific negotiating programs or
Yep.
negotiating streams that has a bunch of high-level political messages in it that people thought were very important. If the president has his way, there's not going to be one of those this year.
Well,
He asserts all the
yeah,
outcomes can be in the specific streams that they're meant to be in.
that's fascinating because that can be a really important valve in these negotiations, right? Where if you don't get key outcomes that folk are concerned about in the particular work streams, you can revert back to the cover text and have that high level negotiation. But that just effectively is loading the pressure up on each of those work streams to get to a resolution.
Yeah, totally, 100%. Now, could there yet be a cover text in the end? I mean, who knows? But he was pretty firm yesterday. Also firm, like-minded developing countries grouping on the finance side of things needs to be very heavily about grants. They were saying investment, the outer layer of commercial finance, these are not things that belong in a decision on finance. It's got to be public grants was their emphasis. So look, overall, I think we're at the stage in one of these conferences where the political consultations haven't yet delivered anything. They're still going on. Technical work, some of it hasn't yet resumed, and a lot of it is to be happening today. And so everybody sort of feels a bit nervous about lack of progress on specifics and, lots of doldrums. It's also just completely standard.
Yeah.
So give it a couple more days and, we'll see where this thing is heading.
It sounds, Tennant, like that this plenary was a much less efficient version of the mid-COP episode of the Let Me Sum Up podcast that we recorded on Friday, which was kind of covering the state of play across all of these areas. So if you want more of that, I guess the people that have made it this far into the video can look up that episode. One of the things that's been interesting to me, sort of watching from afar and following the feeds, is the G20 emerging as a particular sort of alternative locus of influence in these deliberations. G20, interestingly, taking place in Brazil this year. Of course, Brazil is hosting COP30 next year. And a bit of interest to see whether the communique coming out of that summit would say anything substantive about climate. There seems to be, reported, this hasn't been released yet as we record, but reportedly some text in the communique which speaks to the idea that, significant developing countries that aren't currently in the developed country cohort officially within the UNFCCC making contributions, voluntary contributions to climate finance, effectively creating another category of climate finance, which you could track theoretically without mandating, a particular number. So, Tennant, I don't know, like that's interesting, an interesting intervention. It sounds like a classic COP fudge that might actually be helpful in kind of getting parties across the line with something that everybody can live with, right?
A rich and sugary cube of fudge always helps a COP outcome get swallowed. Um, yeah, I think that's right. And there's like a number of issues where if parties want to come to an agreement, they ought to be able to get there. And it's just a matter of finding a formulation that enables things to move on substantively, and where there are positions that people don't want to give up, that they can say they didn't. And so, yeah, this question of donor base is quite important to that. Very few parties in the developed world are open to the idea of in any way weakening the old formulation of developed countries take the lead, uh, and common but differentiated responsibilities. It's also true that a bunch of countries that were deemed developing countries 30 years ago have had a good 30 years and are in a strong economic situation these days,
Yeah.
and really in practice need to be a part of the finance solution. So I think there's absolutely a pathway to getting those countries on board without compromising the principles around developed countries taking the lead, or redefining developed countries, that would be unacceptable to a lot of parties. But
Well,
we'll
it
see.
goes.
Very helpful
We
to
will.
have a high level summit going on elsewhere that's reinforcing this one.
Yes, and I mean it's interesting if you look at the requests from developing countries for in excess of $1 trillion in climate finance,
A
delivered
year.
annually. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
On the one hand, and the request from developed countries to kind of retool the categories for who's counted as developed and developing and who's making contributions over time. You could see these both as ambit claims in the context of these negotiations, and and there's opportunity for both sides to move close to the middle on each of them. The question is whether they can actually get there over the next few days.
Yeah, I think that's right. And also, um, will enough of the essential technical work have been done on all the things that are being held up by, or have been held up by finance, that
Yeah.
if and when the political blockers on finance are resolved, that they can actually move far enough on the other things. Um, they've got to have some words that are decent on mitigation in either the mitigation work program stream or the global stock take stream, to satisfy developed countries, especially the Europeans. They've got
Yeah.
to have a strong outcome on finance, of course. They've got to resolve some gnarly issues on adaptation that will be linked to finance. And then we'll see where they get to on the various highly technical issues in Article 6. The thing that I'm still really waiting to see where and how it's going to be resolved is that there are continued consultations on the forum on response measures and the issue of, among other things, where to and how to address your old friend, unilateral trade-related climate measures,
Ding, 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 ding. You
in
snuck it
the
in.
future work. Eh,
I love it. All right. Well,
so we'll see where that gets to.
we will. Look,
But I will be watching that very closely.
as excited as I am to hear about that, I think we're almost out of time, Tim. So I'm sad not to be with you there at COP, but we will keep checking in this sort of format just because it is emerging as a really significant COP on a whole range of fronts, and we want to keep abreast of development. So Thank you for wandering around COP and talking to me the last few minutes. And I'll catch you again very soon.
See you there.